Joining Carl this week is Deborah Matteliano, Global Head of Restaurants for AWS, as they explore the link between avocados and tariffs, the power and risks of Domino's partnership with DoorDash, and a much-loved brand re-emerging in the Big Apple. That's all ahead on this week's Digital Restaurant.
Happy Monday. We're back at the Digital Restaurants, and I am very excited this week. I have to say, I've been looking forward to this episode for a while because I'm joined by Deborah here. If you don't know Deborah, she is the Global Head of Restaurants for AWS. That's right. I've got a big hitter with me today, so I'm going to have to be on my best behavior. Really, Deborah, thrilled to be able to spend some time with you. I know you're at the epicenter of everything going on in our industry. I know you spend a lot of time with executives at QSRs and the marketplaces and probably a lot of the large technology brands as well. But of course, before your days at AWS, you are over at Uber Eats, helping them develop themselves and their technologies globally. So thrilled to have you here. I'm excited to learn more about specifically what you're doing at AWS a little later. But my goodness, have we had a busy week in the news? What do you think of what's been going on? It's been nuts, huh?
Everything from avocados to Wonder and Seamless and coffee and regulations in Boston. So we are probably going to cover the full gamut today. And I think let's buckle up.
Well, you've mentioned one of my favorite foods. Let's get into it. The first question, tariffs, avocados, and the restaurant procurement world. Wow, what on earth are we going to talk about here? Tell us.
Well, avocados are taking center stage right now. Avocados are getting their moment. Between avocado toast in the 2010s and now this resurgence in the news, avocados are famous again. And the reason avocados are taking center stage is because they're central to Chipotle. And there's this focus on how Chipotle has diversified its supply chain going into these tariffs that were announced. So we're seeing that Chipotle has been able to ease some of the pressures that other large restaurant brands are facing because they've been able to focus on domesticating some of their avocado supply. In fact, they take about 90% of California's avocados. And here's what's interesting about avocados. Did you know that in the 1970s, people ate less than 1 pound of avocado per year?
No, I did not. Wow.
How many do you think it is this year?
If it's like me, it's probably 20x that number.
Average in US is 9.
Wow.
So we've got an avocado addiction. And this coverage from the Wall Street Journal outlines how Chipotle has developed an avocado advantage as a result of that. They could be in a very precarious point when you have these tariffs being announced, especially on Mexico, where the avocados tend to be the highest demand and best tasting. Unfortunately, a lot of the foods that Americans like are not grown in America. We tend to like foods like coffee and avocados that are grown in dry tropical environments that we simply don't possess. So we've got Americans addicted to these types of foods, and we have brands like Chipotle thinking ahead on how to diversify supply chain so that they can essentially lower their risk in this type of environment. But you've got winners and losers on the tariffs so far. Even though there's a pause, there's still so much uncertainty here. So while Chipotle has come out as maybe a good strategy to begin, we still don't know what's going to happen. And we've got other brands like Domino's and like Starbucks that, have a lot of potential pluses and minuses to what's going to come next.
It's interesting you're looking at this in terms of the food supply chain. What came to my mind immediately was steel, right? Or the equipment that you need to have within restaurants. And to what degree is that manufactured outside the US? And the way in which even the raw materials are perhaps produced outside of the US as well, and what effect that's going to have. I mean, are our restaurants going to be more expensive to build as a result of this? If the supply chain is more attributed to the US, then maybe we can actually build our restaurants a little faster, right?
I was curious, Carl, what you might think about purchasing power. Obviously, tariffs are affecting our restaurant brands, but what do they do to the consumer's wallet? We know that last year, consumers pretty much had it on price increases for restaurants. The summer had the most record number of promotions ever in summer 2024. So the value meal, does it work? We don't know, but we know consumers are not willing to tolerate anything other than value in general in the equation. So what do you think that's going to do?
The first piece that comes to mind is, what does it mean for the entire restaurant itself? I think for the digital side, convenience still is king. We've seen that all the way through the inflationary pressures over these last few years, that actually it's still held up pretty well. And actually from the marketplace perspective, like you say, a lot more marketing, a lot more promotions. And so those platforms have done pretty well as a result of the advertising revenues going through them. But for the restaurant themselves, especially the smaller guy that perhaps doesn't have a huge digital footprint, you've got to wonder about whether those inflationary pressures are going to reduce trip count. And I think that's where it comes back to, again, the themes around digital and how strong do you have an understanding of who your consumer is. The smaller entities out there, I'm sure your favorite restaurant's an independent, mine certainly is. And when you think about what it is about that experience that really works, it's because they know you. They know you well and they treat you like you're a member of the family, typically, right? And so therefore, if we've got a better understanding of the digital footprint of our customers and we can know each of their names, each of their preferences, and start building our technology in a way that can service them across all channels, not just through delivery channels, then that can create a better experience. And that better experience could hopefully give you a competitive edge against those that cannot. Because for sure, inflation is probably going to affect the industry at large when it comes to trip visits.
I love what you said there. And what you're really talking about is the mid-market restaurant and even the mid-market consumer. But when we talk about third-party delivery, what's going to happen to demand? To your point, it was pretty sturdy even after the pandemic, up 95% since 2019, when folks thought it would go down in 2022 after life returned to normal, whatever that means at this point. Yet I have to wonder, because if there's going to be some softness in mid-market spenders or for mid-market restaurants, does that mean that the Dash Passes or the Uber One spenders of the world continue to drive that spending? So we've got Grubhub reviving Seamless. Unexpected. Tell us what happened. Tell us what you think it means.
Yeah, well, they're bringing back Seamless, but only in your neck of the woods, in New York City, right? And it's maybe for some, it's a move that felt surprising at first, especially when you consider that Just Eat Takeaway, Grubhub's parent company before Wonder, retired the Seamless brand less than a year ago. But here we are, the relaunch is happening. And it's not just a name swap. It's a reawakening of a brand with deep roots in New York, right? The Seamless brand was founded all the way back in 1999. So for anyone who's lived or worked in the city in the early 2000s, it was the way to get food delivered, whether it was a salad at your desk in Midtown or something greasy or glorious after a night out. And so when it merged with Grubhub in 2013, it kept its own brand. But then, as I mentioned, in 23, Just Eat Takeaway made the call to fold it seamlessly into the Grubhub ecosystem. And so now you've got Grubhub reviving Seamless specifically for New York with a bold yellow and black identity, subway-style design elements, this cheeky New York City-specific marketing. But it's under the hood, it's still Grubhub. So the same tech, the same driver network, the same restaurant options. And it's essentially a front-end brand layer customized for a hyper-local audience. And this bucks the trend from what we've seen when it comes to DoorDash, for instance, when it acquired Caviar in 2019, which is a brand known for its premium upscale restaurant partners. And over time, Caviar has been slowly absorbed into the DoorDash's broader platform. The app, of course, still, I think, exists, but it's a shadow of what it once was. And it's now more of a category inside of DoorDash than a brand with a standalone energy. Same thing with Uber and Postmates, right? After it was acquired in 2020, Uber shut down the Postmates driver operation and merged its infrastructure into Uber Eats. And the Postmates brand hung around briefly, but the focus shifted, I think, to consolidation again, with the idea of one app and one experience. So Grubhub's move with Seamless flips that logic on its head. So instead of simplifying, they're actually redifferentiating. Instead of centralizing, they're localizing. And that's where the story, I think, gets even more strategic. And I'm curious if you're taking this, because I don't think this is Grubhub acting on its own, because of a company you mentioned in your answer to the first question, of course, Wonder. I seem to mention Wonder every show right now, but I don't think we can ignore their role in this too, because for those that haven't been following the story, Wonder is the high concept, high ambition food tech venture founded by Mark Law, the former e-commerce chief at Walmart that sold Jet.com for $3 billion. And Wonder started with a fleet of roving food trucks delivering freshly curated meals to suburban driveways. It's since evolved into ghost kitchens, delivery first concepts, and this kind of brick and mortar hybrid. And he wants it to become known as the Amazon of food. I don't know whether you guys over at Amazon think that's what you want it to be, but hey, that's his big vision. Control of the ordering, the cooking, the delivery, the brand relationship, all in this one closed loop ecosystem. But to do that, you need reach, you need logistics. And most of all, you need a customer facing channel that already has trust. And that's where the Grubhub thing comes in. That's why they probably acquired Grubhub, because it gives them access to this national delivery network and millions of users. But the weird thing about all of this is that Wonder is still relatively small in terms of brick and mortar locations, right? So reviving Seamless could be the key to unlocking that strategy, at least in New York, because they've been talking about the Northeast is going to be the area where they see Wonder growing its footprint. So Seamless, I think, is more than just a nostalgia play. It's almost like a wedge. It's a trusted local brand that gives Wonder a storefront to introduce new experiences. Branded virtual restaurants, exclusive menus, even pre-prepared meals, as we've talked about in the past, or groceries, delivered through this kind of micro kitchen network. And it may become this kind of gateway for Wonder to experiment with premium delivery, ghost kitchen aggregation, maybe even loyalty programs tied to Wonder's broader food ecosystem. And I think that's a smart move if that's really what's behind it. So I don't know. This for me, this isn't about reviving a logo or tapping into old loyalty. It's about building a new kind of delivery ecosystem where Seamless is the skin, Grubhub is the engine, and Wonder is the ambition driving the whole thing forward. But you're the New Yorker. You tell me. What do you think?
Well, that's beautifully put. And one thing that stood out is your mention of trust. Trust is important in New York, and virtual brands historically don't always develop trusted and durable relationships with time. We've seen many start and fail, and we've seen quality be an issue at scale with virtual brands. Yet, if you can connect your virtual brand to something that's so trusted, does it help build that up? Do we say, okay, Seamless is so trusted that maybe you're now willing to experiment on a brand you've never seen before on the Seamless storefront that's a Wonder brand? So I think maybe there's that mix to of regaining some trust in an environment where there's going to be questions and trust might be precarious. And I actually worked with a couple of members of the Wonder team back at Uber Eats to launch our virtual restaurants practice. And consumer trust for virtual restaurants has always been tricky. So what Wonder's doing to diversify where the consumers can come into the app and experience the Wonder ecosystem and then meet the consumer where they are, right? Which is the first step in building trust. So I'm loving this. I'm curious to see how it plays out.
All right, let's go on. Another big partnership. It seems like it's the year of partnerships on the latest one, DoorDash and Domino's. What does a great partnership look like here?
DoorDash and Domino's is a huge partnership. And what's interesting here is that they are still going to be using Uber Eats, but they're no longer going to be exclusive. And so for Domino's and for DoorDash, this is a good thing. This allows Domino's drivers more avenues because they're still going to be used even in this partnership scenario. And I think what's interesting too is that Domino's has described Uber Eats as its billion-dollar opportunity. And so what does it mean now that they have potentially another billion-dollar opportunity?
Why you didn't do the 2 billion?
Exactly. So I imagine there's some dollar signs there for Domino's, but we also know historically that they've been cautious about investing in third-party delivery. And back when I was at Uber Eats, that was a pipe dream to get a brand like Domino's to join the platform. They've been probably the latest adopter of any large QSR on earth to third-party delivery. But the beauty is that, and we talk about tariffs, when you're in an uncertain environment, how do you control what you can control? What you can control is that they've got a wonderful fleet of drivers. Their quality and delivery tends to be incredible. So why not add another channel when you're in that uncertain environment? I would say, given their track record, it would be a smart decision. What do you think? Any other insights?
The big thing for me is, what does it mean for their first party? Because their first party app is really cool. It's obviously they came up with all the tracker and everything like that. But what does it also mean for data? Right? If you're having more of your data accessible and the customers are technically a DoorDash or an Uber Eats customer, what does that mean for Domino's in terms of understanding who their customer is? Knowing your customers by different segments? How much of this might dilute Domino's own ability to understand their customer well? And perhaps because it is such a big brand, maybe there's come to some kind of agreement there. But that, I think, is going to be the big one, is that they want to maintain such a huge dominance of their first party traffic. You want to continue, as I've always said, use third parties as a great way for you to be able to remind people of your brand, but you've got to still have that platform to try and bring them across and give them the right incentives to buy through the first party channels as well. And that is true for the Domino's of this world and the small mom and pops.
Let's move to robots. I think that's the only thing we haven't talked through yet. As we talk through tariffs, one of the things that can come up when folks are talking tariffs is, well, if there's going to be more pressure on cost of goods sold and margins, will we see operators move more towards automation? And the surprising piece about this news with Kernel rebranding and turning the robots off is that they're doing exactly that. So, Carl, what's your take on why that might have been the strategy?
Yes, Steve Ells, of course, known for being the founder of Chipotle, is pivoting again, right? His venture, Kernel, which had positioned itself as a robotic plant-based food startup, is scrapping its original plan. The robots are out, as you said, the automation's on hold, and now the company has rebranded itself under a new name, Swell. And so let's talk about what's happening here, because it's a fascinating case study in ambition, tech constraints, and the very real challenges of reinventing fast food from the ground up. Because when Els launched Kernel, it was billed as this visionary concept, an automated restaurant with a 3D printed kitchen, minimal human labor, a menu centered around plant-based, vegetable-forward items. You know, the whole idea, Deborah, was to rethink fast food using robotics to deliver high-quality meals efficiently and at scale. In fact, I think Els said his mission was to create a restaurant that could be twice as good at half the price. Now, that's a big promise, right? Especially in a market where labor and ingredient costs are constantly rising. And so where most automation solutions are still in their infancy, I think this was something that everyone thought, wow, we're going to keep an eye on this. And the first location opened quietly, again, over where you are in Manhattan last fall, and it was a single unit prototype. And the plan was to start small and then scale quickly. But I think according to this latest update, the fully automated kitchen never really quite came to life. And so the food was prepared by humans. And I think now what he's saying is we're going to abandon all the robotics components altogether. And it really sounds like the tech wasn't ready, or at least not ready to meet the brand's culinary and operational expectations. And that's something we're seeing a lot right now, I think, in the restaurant tech space, right? Ambitious AI this or robotics driven that, running headfirst into the limitations of what's actually feasible in a real kitchen environment. It's kind of like the technologist trying to design the future of the restaurant industry, having never sat foot in a kitchen. But of course, Els has. And so he saw this. And so clearly, I think he, to his credit, has seemingly seen and recognized the risk of just staying the course with a model that just wasn't working well. And rather than doubling down on the robotics, he's pulling back, renaming the company to Swell and shifting the focus to scaling the food and the brand and not the tech. And that's an important pivot because, you know, I'm a big tech enthusiast and I get caught up in the hype of automation and robots flipping burgers and AIs taking orders and ghost kitchens running 24/7. I take that every single day. But the truth is, most restaurant success stories are still grounded in great food, great tight operations, and a clear customer proposition. And I think that's exactly what he did with Chipotle and turning that into a cultural force by doing those types of things. And I think with Swell, he might be signaling a return to those fundamentals. And the challenge now for him, and I'll be curious for your take on this and whether you've even visited the location, is differentiation. Because without that robotic angle, it's entering a kind of crowded field of better for you concepts, right? Think Dig, think Sweet Green, think Just Salad or Tender Greens, right? They've already built traction. And in many cases, they're also building tech-enabled experiences without necessarily robot-run kitchens. So the upside is he's still an incredibly well-respected name in the industry. If he can deliver a product that meets its original promise with that delicious vegetable-forward meals at a reasonable price, it still might find its place. But it certainly feels a bit more like Chipotle 2.0 than the sci-fi future that we thought it would be. But I'm curious, have you been to Kernel? What did you think? And what do you think of his angle here?
I tried to go about 1,000 times and it was always about to open every time I went. So they've got that beautiful store downtown. And you saw operations evolve the past couple of years too. There's been talks of, hey, we're actually doing a little bit more human labor than we planned to. So I guess it's not totally surprising, but what you said about joining the ranks of other better for you, I think is dead on. Either the food has to taste better or it's got to be faster and more accurate. And if we can't do it faster with automation, maybe we've got to make it taste better. And so much, I think there was one piece of that article that talks about seasoning, having the staff members just have a bit more discretion on seasoning. And this is what I love about the restaurant industry. All of these strategic moves can come down to something as simple as salt. That a robot isn't good at salt. No one's been able to develop that. You've got Miso Robotics, which works really well from an automated perspective with organizations like their biggest customer, White Castle, where you're not doing that seasoning at every level of the make line to ensure the final product is there. And we find that the automatics are a lot better with some of the rote tasks that don't involve that human judgment on seasoning. And in fact, when Miso Robotics went to build Chippy for Chipotle, figure out how to do the chip frying automatically, one of the reasons Chipotle didn't move forward with that pilot was because they preferred how the chips tasted when they were seasoned by humans. Sometimes you get a chip that's a salt bomb. Sometimes you get one that's got none. And that's actually the beauty of getting through your bag and having that dynamic experience. Yeah. So that's really what struck me there is where automation helps and when and what context, and where does that human touch that's so critical that goes into taste and differentiation just not have a place for automation?
I totally agree. I think this is the real fallacy when it comes to robotics in general, is that yes, for sure, they're going to be able to help you when it comes to efficiency. Yes, there's an experiential part to it. When I went to Sweetgreen's Infinite Kitchen, I thought it was great, lots of fun, but the experience has to also be efficient. The consumer is still interested in convenience. They want great food, they want great convenience. And yes, that novelty will be interesting to them. But if you still take a long time around that in the food environment, I don't know. I think we're going to be running into problems when it comes to robotics in that regard. And I think that was probably what Els was starting to notice, was that whatever robotic elements they had into the plan, if it couldn't replicate the efficiency of a human-made order, probably wasn't the right fit. All right, well, let's finish it up this week. Maybe not on the level of fun and exoticness when it comes to robotics, but regulatory legislation and all those things. We try and remind people about what's going on. And in Boston, some new permit requests might be impacting delivery companies. And I guess the question for you here is, what is happening in Boston and what does that perhaps mean for elsewhere in the country?
Well, we could take this right back to robotics, Carl, because will Boston end up taxing DoorDash robotics once we have autonomous delivery? So what are the extents of some of these laws might be questions we will ask in the next 5 years. But as of now, this is only for human deliveries. Boston has initially proposed an extra tax and fee on orders for the sake of safety measures being taken in a city like Boston, which is very crowded and where deliveries can be very precarious at scale. So an effort to not endanger even companies like DoorDash want to be able to work with cities like Boston to ensure they're running operations in a way that's safe and effective. Obviously, DoorDash lobbied against having that extra surcharge, and you can imagine why. They've done that many times historically, especially in California. So no idea yet on what these permits are going to cost. Will they be needed on a driver-by-driver basis? Probably. And that's not going to be great for onboarding new drivers in a delivery marketplace where you've got a lot of turnover. So you think of how many new drivers you need to be hiring and onboarding, how quickly you want them to be able to get started after they sign up. If there's now a permit process on top of that's likely going to strain operations. Yet, I would argue it's still probably better than a surcharge, which would directly hit the P&L of the third-party delivery marketplace equation.
I've got a question for you before we leave. What does the global head of restaurants do for AWS? I didn't think you guys had a restaurant. What's going on?
We no longer operate in the prepared foods away from home restaurant space, although we do have Amazon Fresh. It's pretty different. This is AWS for restaurants. Think of me as where AI applications, data, and French fries meet in the center. That is where I spend most of my time thinking about customer experience and operational efficiency for restaurants, but how do we solve that with the data infrastructure that makes that possible? So when you look at, I think you and Bernadette talked the other week about NVIDIA and Yum Brands. I think you also talked about it last week too. The infrastructure behind those AI use cases to deploy them and in a connected way all starts on AWS. So we work with 90% of the world's top QSRs, and we're very proud of all the innovation we've been driving in restaurants. And you'll hear us next week. We'll be at Restaurant Leadership Conference, actually speaking with Yum's VP of Tech at Taco Bell to understand how they built Bite by Yum and how they used AWS.
Nice, with Vadim. Awesome. And of course, if you are not tired of Deborah and I talking, you'll see us together at Food on Demand in early May, where we're going to be talking about those very subjects as well. So if you haven't got your tickets for Food on Demand or IRLC, go see it, and you'll be able to meet Deborah there. Deborah, one last question. How do people get in touch if they want to learn more about AWS and how it can help their restaurant?
You can contact me through LinkedIn. That's usually the easiest way. Most restaurants or restaurant tech providers have account managers and on-demand support available through AWS, and I will gladly either work with you directly or find you the right person. We are here 100% to make the restaurant industry more customer-centric. Just like Amazon's doing this for the retail space, we're here to do it for restaurants. So we are around the clock looking to help restaurants succeed.
Awesome. Well, I also want to say a thank you to your colleagues from afar with regards to their help on Amazon.com with the sale of these 2 books behind me. I always appreciate what Amazon did to make it easier for me as an author, and Audible as well. So if you haven't got a copy of the 2 books, feel free to go to Amazon.com and you'll be able to find those there. Deborah, lovely to speak to you. Really thrilled to be able to have you on the show. It's a real treat. Really appreciate all your insights. And thank you, as always, for listening into the show as well. It really made me feel great to hear that you've been listening over these last few years to the show.
I mean, your book's on my bookshelf. It's table stakes reading for this industry. So if you haven't bought it, I would also second that call to action.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I'll see you in a few weeks. And thanks again for today.
Sounds good, Carl. Bye, everyone.
The Digital Restaurant Podcast is available for you to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Watch us, rate us, and subscribe to The Digital Restaurant on YouTube. And follow along on all our social media digital restaurant channels. Thanks for listening.